My name is Ben Rungsitong. I'm a communications manager at HEC Paris. I'm here with Professor Jeremy Ghez, Professor of Economics here at HEC. And we're here to kind of peer into the tea leaves, if you want to go that far, for the year 2024. Of course, Professor Ghez is the resident expert on business environment and geopolitics and the intersection of that in how it relates to the business world. And so I'm sure we're all very, very interested in seeing what you're looking forward to this year. So I wonder if we can just start off with maybe three things. Now, bearing in mind, of course, that with any sort of list like this, it's impossible to go over everything. So this is absolutely a non-exhaustive list, I have to imagine. But why don't you go ahead and let me know what you're looking forward to this year?
Yeah, it's the tea leaves, but with a few caveats. Let's put it this way, three things that really keep me up at night. The first one is artificial intelligence. We were all introduced in awe in 2022, for those of us who were able to play around with this. 2023 was kind of the year this started to become mainstream. There were conversations. And in Las Vegas, during the Consumer Electronics Show in January, if there's any evidence that companies are basically really using this and now putting this in motion, well, we had all the evidence we needed in Las Vegas. This is actually an ongoing show. It is a reality. It is the thing that we're going to have to live with. Number two, I would say, is elections. Elections, 70 in 2024, in countries that are the home of 4.2 billion people, more than half of the global population. A test for democracies across the world, a test for the rise of authoritarianism. Three major ones in particular that I'm looking at: Taiwan in January, the European elections in June, and most obviously, the US elections in November. And then third thing that's on my mind that is also obvious, but more focused on, the type of things we may not be paying attention to, is geopolitical tensions and conflicts. Now, we know for a fact that there are two major ongoing wars, one in Ukraine, one in the Middle East. There are plenty of other conflicts that have never been as much on Western radar screens, but that should have been, arguably. But I think more deeply, this is happening in some sort of geopolitical vacuum. In the past, we had an order, an international order, that people questioned, that people challenged, but it was there. It seems as this order is crumbling. So all headlines about, this is going to be a historical year, there's a lot of show behind that, but I think it's a pretty legitimate claim. Last time we went through a transformational period, arguably may have been 2008, the Great Recession, but I want to say that was only, and only in brackets, right, an economic crisis, a financial crisis. It was happening in a geopolitical context of relative stability. It was the period when Steve Jobs introduced us to the iPhone, but that too wasn't as transformational as AI. Today, it's about geopolitics, but not only. It's about technology, but not only. It's about politics, but not only. It's about economics, but not only. It's most certainly about climate change as well, but not only. So I think we have a pretty legitimate claim as a generation to think we're about to go through pretty historical times.
That's just a vast number of topics to unpack. And so I think it's maybe a little bit unrealistic to try to delve into them as deeply as they probably deserve. But let's try anyway, at least to skim the surface of some of these subjects that you're referring to. Particularly, I think with AI, it's something really, really interesting. Is there anything in particular at CES in Las Vegas that stood out to you as potentially providing for an upheaval in the environment today?
Yeah, two things. Generative AI is becoming mainstream. That's the first thing that I find quite striking. It is basically a demonstration of how many companies are basically trying to use this. And I think this is going to be important because smaller firms like OpenAI showed a lot of flexibility, showed a lot of agility and basically playing around with these in ways maybe Microsoft and Google couldn't in the beginning. But on the other hand, those giants, those tech giants, may actually have a lot of far more firepower. So you're going to see a very interesting arm wrestling match happening here. And maybe we will need to revisit, textbook explanations about who has more power, the bigger or the smaller firm. The second thing is with AI, I think we've been introduced to generative AI through ChatGPT in particular, but there are other tools out there, and it's becoming increasingly user-friendly. With this in mind, we may be losing a sight of the fact, and again, CES in Las Vegas is certainly showing this, that generative AI is probably just one little piece of the puzzle, one little slice of the pizza. And there may be some really, really strong developments in artificial intelligence that go way beyond this. So get ready to be surprised and to go through a technological revolution that goes well beyond 2023. That was already overwhelming in many respects.
You discuss a lot of subjects overlapping in your recap of kind of the beginning of this. And I wonder if there's going to be more and more pressure on businesses to take more of an active role in social matters, more than they already do at the moment, particularly with the implementation of AI as kind of a mainstream element across the board. So I just wonder if you could comment on that, especially as it pertains to AI and the great fear of it, quote unquote, taking people's jobs. How do you see that kind of growing, developing in the coming year?
It's going to be the $1 million question. And long story short, I'm not sure.
With inflation, it's probably a $1 billion question.
Well, there you go. There you go. That's a good point. I think that what we're seeing right now is AI reinforcing quite a few topics that we knew of in the past. So one, for instance, is productivity. Can AI finally be the technology that reverses the productivity gap that we've seen develop over the years and that have obsessed a lot of economists? I think that's a really open question. Many tech enthusiasts believe that the answer is yes, but I think the jury is still out in terms of how this manifests itself. As you hinted to, is this going to be a job destructor? What is crystal clear is that many developed economies and developing markets as well have experienced what we've called the skills gap. The amount of employers basically not being able to fill some jobs because they don't have the supply of skills coming from the labor market. With artificial intelligence, we know those skills are going to become incredibly technical, and they may not be immediately available. So that's a second question. To what extent can the education system adapt to that and basically offer the right set of skills and the right set of trainings, more to the point? The third question, I think, is regarding ethics, regarding how does this basically work in terms of who do we trust with AI? Interestingly enough, this whole saga at OpenAI, where you had, I don't even know if I'm going to get the chronology right, Sam Altman getting fired and then saying, maybe you want your job back, and Sam Altman saying, that's okay, I'm going to Microsoft, and then going back at OpenAI. I think you see that corporate governance question becoming critical. And again, another question that has always been on our radar screen, but that gets reinforced here. OpenAI was founded as a non-for-profit. It quickly realized that the money it needed to raise would raise limits with that corporate status. So you see basically an evolution as well in terms of who are we going to trust with these types of questions. You ask Elon Musk, he'd tell you, trust only me and a limited set of few people. You'd ask a wider range of investors today. I think the logic of not putting your eggs in the same basket is going to be important because there are many, many ways of actually adapting this technology and making it live through time.
So in a lot of respects, I think what you're touching on here is going to affect a series of generations across the board. And as it happens, you, in your position as a professor, are in a unique position because you teach students aged, I want to say about 20 up to 40 plus, from master's programs MBA, executive MBA, and executive education as well. So I wonder if, I mean, just because you're at that unique touch point, what are some of the things that you have heard? What are some of the questions that your students have asked you in your position as a professor? What are some of the things they're interested in? And you know, is there anything that they're particularly interested in moving forward?
I think that there's a whole conversation about what should artificial intelligence play in the role of my education. These are the younger guys, are the guys who basically, guys and gals who are basically, you know, living through this at a far younger age, a little bit like my generation lived through Google. It sounds ludicrous and insane and very, very trivial to say such a thing, but you know, we didn't have a conversation about using or not using Google. We had trainings about how to use it. I think this wave is far more significant, it's far more transformative, so it raises a lot of fears on the educational side. My hunch is that the more we train these newer students to basically be able to use this tool so that it empowers them rather than just, you know, limits the amount of work they need to do, that's going to be critical right there. Many people basically asked, is this the end of basically exams because you're going to be able to ask ChatGPT for anything? Fact of the matter is, you ask ChatGPT to write your essay, it's going to be a bland essay, it's going to be tasteless, it's going to be unoriginal, it's probably not going to be very authentic. If instead you tell ChatGPT a few ideas that you want to basically emphasize on, ask for the right word, and ask whether you're covering everything, ask whether you're not forgetting something, and so on, that becomes your thought partner, and for them it's going to be critical. For the slightly older, more experienced participants, it's going to be a conversation about how big of a game changer this is. And I think the difficulty we're seeing, or instead of difficulty, the challenge we're seeing, is really those two schools of thought. The tech enthusiasts who want to use this, but you have to make sure they're using it properly, and the tech pessimists, and you're going to have to convince them that they cannot be left on the side of the road. Those are the conversations that are about to come up that I'm very much looking forward to, because I would tend to think there's no single person that can see it all. And I think those exchanges are going to be critical, and university campus is going to be the best way to go forward with those conversations.
And for the pessimists, would you say it's really a sink or swim situation as far as AI is concerned?
Well, maybe they're right. Maybe we're basically in the wake of a fad. Maybe. I personally don't believe so. But what is interesting is that, you know, going back to that whole idea of we're going through historical times, maybe we need to define how big of a game changer this is. And the difficulty today is that I don't know whether we know for sure how big of a game changer this is going to be. It might still be a question of, you know, some of the flops that you might see going down the line. But, you know, we saw flops for the internet early 2000. It certainly didn't kill the internet wave. It was just the very, very early beginning. This is what it feels like today. And I think we're going to have to accompany people to convince them, you know, sink or swim. You're going to have to basically be able to be at least literate in those solutions, but creative as well. It's a cliche, but the sky's the limit. I think has never been more appropriate than in this context.
So there's room, ample room, I would say, for optimism as far as this is concerned. It's really just a matter of your state of mind as far as the way that you consider this subject. Now, kind of moving on to something that it, you know, has a little bit darker clouds, maybe some more headwinds. As a professor at a business school, you are accustomed to kind of being the reference point for geopolitical topics. Would you say that this year is more than perhaps ever, it's important for business leaders to keep their fingers very much on the geopolitical pulse, given all of the implications it has worldwide? So what are some of the more crucial geopolitical touch points or even flashpoints that are going to be coming up this year?
Yeah. Is geopolitical risk more than ever relevant today? I don't know about more than ever. There's always a problem with comparing to the past. There's always an argument for it and against. But certainly, as you suggest, in absolute values, there's certainly something really dramatically going on right now. The two most current topics and issues over the horizon in the short run are obviously what will happen in Ukraine and what will happen in the Middle East. I think that in both cases, the type of worries we face is that it's a global system that is not working and that is dysfunctional. We used to believe, and by we I really mean Western nations, when we're sitting here in Paris or in Washington or in Brussels, we felt as if we had an international order that was flawed, that was imperfect, but that provided a sense of stability and international law. The crises in the Middle East and in Ukraine are basically suggesting that there are some, as we say in the jargon, revisionist powers, challengers who basically want to contest the relevance of this international order and bring something else to the table. This is not happening in a technological vacuum. It's not happening in an economic and financial vacuum. It's not happening in a climate change vacuum, obviously. So it means that these crises, the potential for them to be amplified is even bigger. What I think is going to be a key measure here is the extent to which two worlds, one basically dominated by the West, or one that is the West, and the other one that has different names. One of the names is China. Another name is Russia. Another name, perhaps more pointedly, is the T25, the transactional 25 countries, who refused, along with Western countries, to condemn Russia's war in Ukraine. You have right here a second world that is basically saying, you know, this has to be a two-way street, and it can't only be when Western countries are actually upset with something that this needs to become a topic. We need to be part of the conversation as well. Ultimately, from a business and investor side, I think that all of these geopolitical crises in the short run mean that the very notion of risk is becoming far more multifaceted right now, or at least we're getting a crash course in revisiting all of those facets. The geopolitical aspect we kind of saw early 2010s with the Arab Springs, with the war in Syria, that were quite critical events, but not of the scale of what we're going through right now. So how do you embed them, and how do you start thinking about what might happen next? In the medium and longer run, there's obviously this showdown between the United States and China. How will that basically unravel? I talk a lot to my students. I'm sorry for this historical
No, that's what we're here for.
Side note.
No, that's what we're here for.
The Shanghai Communique between the Americans and the Chinese in 1973 is a very, very strange document by today's standards. There were a series of meetings between the Chinese and the Americans, orchestrated by Henry Kissinger, who's kind of the modern-day father of the globalized system that we see today. And basically, initially secret, then they became official. The whole idea that Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon had is triangulation, trying to get closer to China in order to weaken Soviet Russia. The Shanghai Communique starts with a sentence which is, "We met." The first paragraph is the world according to China. The second paragraph is the world according to the United States. You put these side by side and you think to yourself, these guys live on two different planets. But the last concluding paragraph of this communique is, you know, not so many words, but we should do this more often. It was nice to speak. This is a measure of what is impossible today. That dialogue has basically collapsed. Now, a lot of observers saw that handshake in San Francisco between the Chinese and the American presidents, thought that this might happen again, that maybe there might, but I think that there may be structural forces, structural headwinds, making it incredibly difficult for these two countries to talk to each other. What will happen geopolitically, honestly, is anyone's guess. Obviously, the fate of Taiwan is a question. The ability of those two nations to avoid direct conflict is another. The whole ramifications this has in terms of trade, in terms of economic relations, in terms of technological relations, AI not least of the topics on that list, are all, you know, going to be very hot topics to manage. But we're entering a world in which, you know, that global order collapsing, again, is not a philosophical question. It really means that, we're getting into a new chapter of globalization. Yesterday, it was about interdependence. You depend on me, I depend on you, and it's a win-win situation. Today, it's a zero-sum game. What you win, I lose. What I win, you lose. Making compromises between the two major actors, incredibly, incredibly difficult.
So we've actually talked quite a bit about, we've touched on a number of subjects which are, to put it mildly, ominous, right? And I think it's probably appropriate given all of the upheaval happening around the world right now moving forward. But is there anything that you're looking forward to in 2024? Trying to kind of put a little bit more of a positive sheen on what to look forward to this year. I think it's kind of natural to be pessimistic, but what are you excited for?
I think the Olympic Games coming to Paris is going to be something. I think this is one of the very last institutions in the world where people come together. And this sounds, very idealistic and very high-minded, but I think to some extent, if the dialogue, as we talked about, is about to crumble between the two major superpowers, if that's a major risk, if the IMF talks to us about the fragmentation of the global economy and so on, well, the Olympics is still a place where we can meet in a place, we can talk, maybe we can argue about stuff, but at the very least, there's that common meaning. I think it's important for me too, and I think for a lot of people who may be listening to this as a father of young children, for them to see slightly older athletes that worked very hard to reach their dreams. I think that too is a very powerful message to be able to, open up doors for this very young generation because they're going to have to be motivated, to go out and fix stuff. I think that's going to be a really, really important time. The second thing may actually be even more personal, but still related to what we spoke about before on artificial intelligence. These new tools and the type of discussions we're going to be able to have as an education community about how we do our business now. I'm a tech enthusiastic, cautiously enthusiastic tech. I wouldn't call myself a geek, but still an enthusiast. But I'm looking to see where this is going to take us. Through our exchanges with fellow faculty at HEC Paris and beyond, through discussions with pedagogical engineers, through our discussions with some of the corporate relations that we have at HEC, and most obviously, and before all of that, with our participants, I think this is going to be a very interesting year. 2022, 2023, we kind of played around with this. 2024, I kind of have this feeling we're about to get serious about it.
And you're talking about AI as, a mass market adoption that's happening in 2024 for you. Exactly.
So it's most likely going to start with generative AI, at least at my level. It's what I'm starting to play around with. And again, as we say in the jargon of business environment, I don't know what I don't know. So I'm not even sure basically how I'm going to end this 2024 year. It hits me, exactly a year ago, we didn't know that much about AI. We were just seeing a wide range of tools pop up, and unless you invested time and energy to try to figure out what these tools were doing, you would basically quickly feel overwhelmed or maybe have the temptation to dismiss it altogether. So, many things can happen. This is kind of a poster child story of exponential change, how, you can be snowballed in a radically different world very quickly. It can be a source of anxiety, but I am looking forward to that part, the discussions, and what does this change about our business going down the line.
So there is still reason for optimism looking forward into 2024. And I just wonder, in that vein, I've prepared a couple of kind of more off-the-wall questions for you to see. So if you had to, sorry, here's Yeah, okay. So if you had to organize a summit between world leaders and CEOs on a deserted island, what would be the 3 items that you would put in the survival kit to ensure productive discussions? So they're not at their throats, at each other's throats the whole time.
So we're speaking about basic tools.
It could literally be anything. You could put your book on there just for.
Well, certainly I put my book. I wish, because that's the toolbox that they might need. I think that the first item on the agenda would be basically how do you basically work together better. There's plenty of data out there that suggests that trust is basically declining significantly, and that businesses to some extent may be immune to that. So that means that, they may have a capital of trust that can help them achieve a far wider array of missions that they ever imagined. That means governments are going to need business to some extent. How do they work hand in hand? That's going to be a real interesting item on the agenda when it comes to thinking about, the state's mission and its ability to fulfill, its future missions going down the line. We've gone through 3 miserable years of the pandemic, and we see that the countries that were able to succeed and to get out of this more quickly, well, they had a very efficient state, but they also had partnerships with the private sector. I think, again, that's going to be a real major issue right there. The second thing I would think about is basically on the agenda, again, can we basically have a conversation about the future of globalization? There's that pervasive idea that increasingly globalization is a zero-sum game, one in which there can only be tensions, one in which, there won't be shared dividends. I think we may need to revisit the rules of the game globally, and it's very good that you included businesses in there so that they also have their say. I think that there's going to be a real debate and conversation to be had between these guys on how do we save that international order, or if not save it, at least redraw it in a way that is acceptable to a wide range of stakeholders. And by that, I mean, I don't think the Western world should renounce its values. I think it would be incredibly important, but at the same time, it should also recognize, the rise of those incredibly powerful countries that are inspiring other smaller countries around the world. The third thing I would say is to go beyond, that pessimism, and indeed we speak about geopolitics and the state of the world and the state of the business environment. Usually it's a very depressing conversation. The other side of the coin is maybe emphasizing on the fact that we're living in a period where, we've never had access to so many solutions. We've never had access to so many resources. Child mortality is down. Education numbers are up. It's becoming increasingly cheap to access information through the internet and all of the ramifications this have in terms of education and so on. What type of solutions do we start finding together? That's going to be really interesting. When it comes to technology, artificial intelligence, but not only, there's the whole technical aspect in which you really need the minds to develop it. But there's that second branch of, how do I use it? How do I challenge business as usual? How do I challenge the status quo? This is what's unraveling with generative AI right now. And I think that more broadly on that summit, I would get them to start thinking about, all of those opportunities. What do we do with this?
Still waiting for your items.
Still waiting for?
Your items. The items.
So the items, I would say internet connection.
Okay.
For fact checking.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2.
Are you totally convinced? Are you totally convinced by the Are you convinced by the reliability on the internet to provide accurate facts?
No, I'm not. but I am even less convinced by the ability of these guys to actually agree on the facts.
Fair enough.
So you might need the tool. I would probably say, can items be people?
Yeah, why not?
A bunch of journalists in there, just to journalists and academics to provide the context, to provide the broader approaches, the broader problems, the data they need, or the framework. And I'll throw in some artists, and which I would include, poets, and to give them the sense of the symbols of what they do. It seems some of these guys don't understand basically the symbols of what they do. The third item, I would say a lot of food, because they're probably going to need a lot of energy.
That's probably true. How about another hypothetical? So you have a hypothetical reality TV show where CEOs switch roles with politicians for a day. Which business leader do you think would make an excellent president? This is not necessarily an endorsement of any sort, but I mean, just hypothetically.
All right, I think I'm going to choose the most provocative example I can, and I would go with Elon Musk. Not because I believe in Elon Musk's teachings or that he would be a good president, but I think he would most probably be put in a situation where he sees a far wider range of issues that go beyond the tech, that go beyond the bottom line profit, and that go really to everyday life issues. I think he has a sense that his technologies can do that. You see that with Starlink, in particular, how he provides internet access to a wide range of people. But I think that, the job of politicians requires a lot of competence, and it's not one that you can improvise overnight. And I think it's quite easy to criticize, and I think Elon Musk sitting on the tools he's sitting on, with the financial resources he has, I think this would be an incredibly enlightening session that would shed light on all of the potential that we have as a whole collectively to transform societies.
So you have a final word or two, if there's anything else that you wanted to talk about? I don't know. Have we missed anything here?
I think, I'd like to quote from the Natixis report, global report this year, that said, the potential for one bad geopolitical actor through one action to challenge, market and investor assumptions is pretty big. And I would actually even rephrase that to say it's not one bad geopolitical actor. Recent history has shown it could actually be anyone, even with good intentions. And the ability to basically challenge what we take for granted. We've seen this all over the place. We've seen this with a bunch of idealists at OpenAI. We've seen this on October 7th. In Palestine and in Israel, southern part of Israel. We see this day in and day out with those young entrepreneurs that we meet, maybe that will not have as much impact as those two events, but most certainly will have a lot of local impact. I think that we really have to have a conversation about what are we taking for granted, what assumptions are we making, and even the strongest ones, the ones we find the most legitimate, what happens the moment they're proven false? I think companies and investors are going to have to do a lot of hedging, as they've always done, a lot of scenario analysis, as they've always done, but they may need to basically start looking at different horizons. Nobody, this is an excessive statement, obviously, as any generalization, but nobody really believed in Donald Trump's election, except, sorry for the trivial point, The Simpsons. And that says something about the power of fiction. It says something about the power of looking at stories, reading books, watching TV. Don't only do that, but do that as well, because it means, that the limits of possibilities are broadened, and you start to see the world with, through the real dynamics that are playing out. And I think this is incredibly important, because, again, if there's the potential for one actor to challenge assumptions, the more you read, the more you imagine, the more you create, well, the broader horizons you might actually adopt.
So it's interesting that you mentioned fiction and the power of art, and really how impactful it can be. I know that one of your preferred images is actually the incredibly vivid image of the Red Queen from Alice in Wonderland. That image, just to kind of remind people, is that it's almost impossible to catch up to an entity that's moving at that type of speed unless you keep moving as fast, year after year, if not faster. So I just wonder if there is a red queen out there that you think everyone really should be paying attention to, that we haven't quite touched on yet.
Wow. If I had to pick a red queen, I would say, it's all of those would-be change makers or change makers in training that are all over the place, some of them on this campus, others, in the suburbs, for all I know, the suburbs of Nairobi, New Delhi, or Beijing. So it's not a cultural thing, it's not a political thing, but all of those people who have seen and understood that business as usual isn't going to be lasting too long. Now, that's an easy statement to make, but a lot of them basically are drawing some implications from this and asking themselves, how do you basically make sense out of this changing world? Asking yourself the constant, so what? Geopolitics is a field that we might have taught 20 or 30 years ago in a business school, where you would basically have a very brilliant, very legitimate diplomat come in and talk about the state of the world. But you'd have two worlds in the same classroom, the diplomat and the business community. There'd be a very nice conversation, and that would be it. I think the next stage in this conversation that is happening right now is to say those shouldn't be two worlds. They should be one world with different sets of actors talking to each other with the ability to draw some implications. There are some walls that are going to need to fall. And I think those change makers have understood very, very clearly that, they may be in a field, but broadening their horizons isn't just for fun, isn't just a cool intellectual endeavor, which it is, by the way, but it's also basically understanding that you have a wide range of actors that will never, ever solve your business problem, but that may give you some critical pieces of information about, the state of the world dynamics that you may not have seen.
Jeremy Ghez, his looking into the tea leaves for 2024. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.